person is the other one. Okay. Let's see. There's a gentleman back here, Katie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dr. Brown, I want to thank you for your service. There isn't anybody here that has more respect for you than I do. Thank you.
Thank you.
But with all due respect, one of the threats that I think you left out is our national debt. Right now, we're at 15 trillion. They're looking for, what, 1.2 trillion more? So that's 17 trillion dollars that we're going to owe. I've also heard two figures of our unfunded liabilities, which are like $60 trillion, and I heard $100 trillion. Let's go with the lower one, 60 trillion. So that's $76 trillion that we owe. How on earth can we ever pay that off? You can balance the budget, you can do away with the wage fraud and all that other stuff. How on earth are we going to pay that debt off? That's the downfall of this country, in my opinion.
Well, that's a great question, and I mentioned in passing that I helped balance the budget for the only time in your lifetime you had 4 straight balanced budgets. I was Speaker of the House and developing the program. So I have some interest in this. And the only major entitlement reform in your lifetime is welfare reform, where 2 out of 3 people went to work or went to school, and we saved an enormous amount of money out of that program. I think it's very clear that you have to do 3 things. You have to reform the government to make it dramatically less expensive. You have to actually cut parts of the government to make it dramatically less expensive. And you have to have very dramatic economic growth. If you have big enough economic growth, if you're growing at 5 or 6% a year for a decade, the sheer momentum of that scale of jobs and growth begins to shrink the relative size of the budget because you're growing the economy at a time when you're controlling spending and the budget becomes smaller. This is what happened after the Civil War and after World War II, is that we just had this huge increase in the size of our economy. At the same time, you want to reform the government. I worked with a group called Strong America Now who want to apply a management system called Lean Six Sigma to the government. They think they can save $500 billion a year. Now, it's not gigantic money, but it's $5 trillion plus over 10 years. And if that's one piece of what you're doing, it makes a difference. I think if you take my unemployment training model, I suspect the first year that we require people to take training as a part of being on unemployment compensation, you will see a dramatic drop in the number of people who apply for unemployment compensation. And so you begin to get changes in the patterns. If you have a dramatic effort on federal land and a dramatic effort on offshore oil and gas, all of that pays royalties and taxes in a way that dramatically increases the revenue side. I am for very profound change in some of the entitlements. One of the projects we have really for these younger people is a program for young folks that says they should have the right to choose a personal Social Security savings account if they want one. We have 2 historic examples. This is not a theory. Galveston, Texas, and Chile both allow people to have their own savings account. And if you start at 15, 16, 17 years of age with your first part-time job, and you put your share of the Social Security tax away, and it builds compound interest for your entire working lifetime, the average person retires with 2 to 3 times as much money as they get under the current system. In addition, that becomes your estate, because now it's an actual build-up of assets. It's not just a paper transfer between generations. And it turns out that because you're saving so much money, you end up increasing the size of the economy because you have so much more capital to invest out of the savings. What's the net effect? Martin Feldstein at Harvard, who was Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors chairman, estimates that the program that young people could voluntarily take, and the Social Security actuary estimates that between 95 and 97% of all young people would take it, because the payback is so gigantic. You have to be pretty obstinate not to take it. That program at the end of 1 generation eliminates half of all the inequality of wealth in the United States. Because every single worker becomes an investor. Every single worker ends up with stocks and bonds. Every single worker rides with the economy, and as the economy gets bigger, so do their savings. So you have a virtuous circle that the money you're saving gets the economy to grow faster. As the economy grows faster, your income goes up, which gives you more money to save. And so you continue building this momentum. In Chile, this last year, their savings fund was 72% the size of the entire economy. That's how much money they save. And Chile now allows people to invest overseas because the economy is not big enough to absorb it. So I think there are a series of steps like that you can take, which you have to recognize. This is why you've got to build a political organization that's prepared to stick together for a long time. It would probably take us I think it would take probably 5 years to balance the budget if we're really serious about it. Could happen slightly faster if we get very, very rapid economic growth. You then have to stay balanced and run a surplus probably for 10 to 15 more years. Now, if you're determined to do that, that means that at some point in that period, you would actually have paid the debt down so much that it would begin to be an irrelevancy. You wouldn't care about it. But it takes a very disciplined, long-term approach that at the same time is very practical about today's decisions. If you look at what your House did here, when they went into office, they did something that I'm trying to export all over the country. They changed the budget process in a very common sense but bold way. And Speaker O'Brien deserves a lot of credit for this. They had the Ways and Means Committee report on income first. So the Ways and Means Committee came in and said, look, this is the amount of money we have this year. And they said, okay, that's the amount we'll spend. Normally what states do is they figure out how much they want to spend, and then they go looking for more money. Instead they said, if that's all the money we have, I guess that's all we can spend. A little bit like a family. They cut 11% out of the total budget, 16% of the non-federal budget in 1 year. Now that, I know it was controversial, I know different people have different attitudes, but that is an extraordinary step towards a balance, towards the kind of approach you need in Washington. There is so much fat in the Washington government. If the Department of Housing and Urban Development disappeared tomorrow, it would be weeks before anybody knew it. So they always have this thing, they say, non-essential personnel don't need to come in because of the storm. I think it'd be kind of cool to go around all that day and figure out who was non-essential. You say the next day, by the way, glad you were here for a while, goodbye. I mean, you can do that by whole departments. I think you have to have that attitude. Okay? This gentleman right here.